Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Terrebonne Home Care. Very glad you are joining us and very excited to hopefully get some answers. You know, we down here have really been suffering and really having to deal with a great deal over this past year. And we're hoping to get some of those answers. We welcome into the program the Louisiana Commissioner of Insurance, Jim Donelon. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you, Keith.
And so maybe if we can just start off with maybe just an overview, just kind of a state of the union of where things are with insurance here in Louisiana, so you can kind of give us a starting point.
Absolutely. Of course, our market is challenged in the aftermath of back-to-back horrific hurricane seasons. Laura, Delta, Zeta impacting the southwest corner of our state in 2020. And then a year to the day later, Ida making landfall in Port Fourchon, with the same 150-mile-an-hour winds that Lake Charles experienced a year earlier. The second most powerful hurricane to ever hit our state, according to the National Weather Service, which says the only larger or more impactful hurricane happened over 100 years ago, called the Last Island Hurricane of 1856. That was a true Category 5 with 156-mile-an-hour winds. These two hurricanes were just under Category 5 size, and the devastation they left behind is just mind-boggling. We've collected, since Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida, over 800,000 claims that were filed. We've collected in Louisiana $22 billion across those claims. That puts these as the second and third most expensive hurricanes in our state's history, behind only Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, that cost insurers doing business in Louisiana $23.3 billion in paid insured losses. That doesn't include flood insured losses. Those Katrina and Rita, the FEMA NFIP does not break out the two different hurricanes. They just categorize it by a hurricane or by a calendar year. And we collected in 2005 and 6 for Katrina and Rita insured flood damage. We collected an additional $16 billion. Fortuitously, these two hurricanes, Laura and Ida, were relatively dry hurricanes. They brought incredibly powerful storm surge to Grand Isle, Port Fourchon, and folks right there on the coast. But the populated areas of Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard, Calcasieu, Houma, Thibodaux were not subjected to the kind of flooding events that we feared would come with those two impactful hurricanes. Now, the effect of those storms and those 800,000 claims has been significant on our property insurance market. On the homeowner side, we lost 6 companies to insolvency over the past year. Actually, 3 of those companies were put into liquidation, not by us, but by their domiciliary regulators. 2 of them, Gulfstream and Southern Fidelity. Florida was their domicile, and their regulator, the Florida Department of Insurance, put those 2 companies into liquidation. Gulfstream, before our hurricanes, they left 9,000 policyholders behind for us to take over here in Louisiana. But the losses were not in Louisiana that caused Gulfstream's failure. It was Florida losses. And the same, frankly, is true for Southern Fidelity, the most recent, also domiciled in Florida and put into liquidation by the Florida Department of Insurance, leaving some 42,000 policyholders in Louisiana looking for coverage, myself included. I've been insured by Southern Fidelity for the past 10 years and had to get coverage elsewhere after they went broke. The other out-of-state company, domiciled company, was Americas, which was domiciled and put into liquidation by the District of Columbia regulator. The other 3 were ours. State National and Access Home were Louisiana domestics, as was America's. America's was DC, as was Lighthouse. Lighthouse, along with State National and Access Home, were domiciled in Louisiana, and it was up to me to put those three into liquidation. Totally, they left behind 54 and 9, 63 and 30, 93 and 12, so 105 and 42, so 42 and 12, 54, 154,000 policyholders. And we were able to get two companies to assume seamlessly. The first company, Gulfstream, their 9,000 policies. Centauri took them over, and on the same terms and conditions, I'd say those 9,000 policyholders didn't even realize there had been a transition. Same thing happened with America's, State National, and Access Home. The SafePoint insurance company out of Miami, Florida, with a small book of business in our state, took on those 54,000 policies again seamlessly. But the rest,
Commissioner, let me stop you for a second.
And are struggling with that as we speak.
So I appreciate that. What I want to do is be able to kind of let people know what that means. And so, and so you were talking about the 6 companies and how the impact has been made, 3 and 3 as kind of a breakdown. Let's talk about the impact. And so you said that there was kind of a seamless, for about 63,000 of those, seamless transition where a lot of people didn't even realize that another company had picked those up. Is that something through your department or through the state where you find, or you guys find a way to get another company to help cover that?
Yes, it is. Okay. When a company goes insolvent, we appoint a receiver to administer the estate. And one of the things that receiver does is put out a notice that this company has gone insolvent. We asked for RFPs, request for proposals, to take over those policies and got all of them placed for the first 4 companies, actually, Gulfstream, America's, State National, and Access Home, with first Centauri and then SafePoint. And that was seamless, as I said. And then the next that went down was Lighthouse with 30,000 policyholders. And we put out a similar RFP and actually got offers to take on all 30,000 policies. But it was late in the reinsurance marketplace calendar. Reinsurers reinsure these small regional companies up to their chins because the big guys, the big companies, pull away from coastal exposure. So we have been able to attract 30 of these small regional companies to take their place.
To address that.
And when we lost 3 of them, we asked for proposals, we got offers, but it was too close to the beginning of the hurricane season, the end of the reinsurance season, when everyone was acquiring their reinsurance for this year, for this hurricane season, and those companies pulled back, leaving those 30,000 policies without a place to go. Louisiana law guarantees those people, as a market of last resort, a policy from Louisiana citizens. And what we were able to do for them is extend that deadline for Lighthouse and for a not insolvent company, but a going out of business company, Mason. For those policyholders, their deadline was June 30th. We extended that 30 days. For Southern Fidelity, where I had my policy, their deadline by Florida court action was July 15th, or is July 15th. And they had up until that day under the court order to find coverage somewhere else. We, through citizens, extended those deadlines 60 days. So those folks have from now until the end of August, and for Southern Fidelity, 2 weeks into September, to find other coverage, or they can get a policy from citizens retroactive back to the day that deadline was imposed by the courts overseeing those 3 failed companies.
And so is there some mechanism in place based on that information where they can only go up so much with insurance coverage? Because I know you're mentioning this and people have the option for 30 days to do that. But right now, there's so many people that can't afford the insurance coverage because it's going up astronomically.
It's not going up astronomically in the
Okay.
homeowners market. It is in the commercial market, which is unregulated largely for its coverage, because most of it is coming from the surplus lines market. Think
Okay.
Lloyd's of London. And surplus companies in every of the 50 states are unregulated. I call them the cowboys of the insurance industry, because they go in where no one else, where others fear to tread, and do business in the aftermath of catastrophes like we had, and can charge whatever rate they deem appropriate for the coverage that they're taking on. And that has gone up significantly.
Okay.
On the homeowner side, rates have gone up this year 6.7%.
Okay.
Now, premiums have gone up a lot, because what is also going on, super inflation, 9.1% announced just yesterday. But on top of that, I did a insurance conference that I do every year back in the spring at the World War II Museum Hotel in New Orleans. Walking down the corridor, looking at all the panels that are being presented at that time, and I stick my head in one, and on a slide is a slide that says nationwide property insurance, 64% of it is insured for less than the cost of replacing that insurance, 64%, and to the tune of 27% underinsured for the cost for the coverage that they think they have, that they are inadequately covered by the amount of coverage they have in place. So if you right size that adds 27% to the cost of insuring a home. You add to that the cost of inflation. All of that is playing a part in prices going up as we knew they would in the aftermath of these storms. But on the homeowner side, it is on average statewide 6.7%, but the cost of insurance, the premium you're paying, is much more than 6.7% when you add to it the cost of increasing the coverage to the actual replacement cost of that property.
And so we were talking last segment about what happens with people who have paid money to these companies that have become insolvent. Tell us what happens to that money and if they get paid back.
They do. They get their unearned premium. If they're 6 months into their policy with a failed company, they get the next 6 months premium back from the estate of the failed company. It's the top priority. There is money enough to return those unpaid, unearned premiums from the estate of the company to those policyholders. It's done administratively through the Louisiana Insurance Guarantee Association, which is the safety net under all failed companies doing business in our state. And they take over the administrative processing of claims, of returning those premiums, of defending the lawsuits that invariably come with a failed insurer. That's done by LIGA, which is a state-sponsored safety net similar to the FDIC under failed banks.
Okay. And so I guess one of the other questions, and for me, it's one of those things, and for you with having to lose your insurance, I guess for me, the question becomes, how is it that the insurance companies seem to have all of the power to be able to dictate their terms when it comes to settlement in the state of Louisiana?
Well, they don't have all the power.
Okay,
when it
so
comes
explain that
settlement.
to me.
Yes, I'll be happy to.
Okay.
We have what's called market conduct authority over the failed operating companies, not the failed companies. Well, those go to LIGA, and LIGA is a state entity and not subject to regulation by the Department of Insurance. But the companies while doing business are under our jurisdiction. And as I said, we had 800,000 claims filed for Laura Delta Zeta over the past 2 years. We had 7,000 formal complaints filed against those companies that generated those 800,000 claims. And we investigated those complaints and fined a handful of those companies, 6 of those, the most egregious in the churning of adjusters, the failure to communicate with policyholders, et cetera. We don't have authority to mediate claims between the company with their engineer or expert saying it's that claim is only worth to replace that roof $20,000, and the policyholder with their contractor, engineer, whatever, saying it's worth $60,000. That is really the only place to resolve that, if it can't be negotiated, is in the courts, in the judicial system. And I will tell you that a very small percentage of the 800,000 claims have ended up in the judicial system. I also want to tell you, viewers, that if they're not satisfied with what they have gotten from their company, that's not the end of the line. They have the right to file a supplemental claim, cash the check, spend the money, file another claim, bring your receipts showing that you gave me $10,000 to repair my roof and it actually cost me 15. Give me the other 5,000 that you owe me because you underpaid me for what it actually cost in this surge from the storms. 800,000 repair jobs had to be done, right, and rocket spiking cost of repairs, right, labor, all supplies,
supply chain,
cetera,
sure,
with inflation.
Right. And so I know one of the things that we talk about all the time, and we hate to kind of bring that up, but you mentioned litigious is really the only route to go. Do we have anything in between? Hey, you're not paying me, you're not doing what you're supposed to. Hey, I'm filing a secondary supplement and a lawsuit. Is there anything in between that, yes, that we can do?
We did create a voluntary mediation program. I negotiated with two mediation firms, one in Baton Rouge, Perry Dam, that's one of the oldest and biggest mediation firms in the state, and the other in Metairie, MAPS, M-A-P-S, that is also one of the oldest and largest mediation firms. But it's limited to residential disputes, coverage, not coverage, but quantum, the amount. When that's all that's in dispute is what your contractor says it's going to cost to repair your property and what the company's expert or computer data system, whatever, right, says it should cost. Right. If it's less than $50,000 or $600 that I urge the companies to pay in their own interest to avoid litigation, I urge them, when the policyholder is willing to do it, to front the $600. I then amended that bulletin announcing that or making that program available to say, okay, if your company won't pay it and you want to pay it instead of going to the expense of a lawyer, you can pay it as well and access the program. Unfortunately, only a couple of hundred mediations have been done by those two mediation firms. They agreed to this up to an hour and a half, up to $50,000 dispute on residential policies, and didn't get a lot of takers. There is more litigation there than there is mediation of that nature going on.
Okay. From a temporal dimension, when was that, if you don't mind, as we close out this segment? When did that take place?
About a year ago.
Okay.
And I will also add that some of the courts in the Home of Terrebonne area, some of the state courts have created court mediation programs that they order people to participate in. And in Lake Charles, the federal court, Judge James David Kane created a mediation program that also had the authority to order companies to participate in, and it did. They did.
One of the things that's happening here, the anniversary of about a month away here, the anniversary of Hurricane Ida that caused so much tremendous damage here. People are wondering if there's anything that they need to know or be aware of as this anniversary date hits, if there's any limitations that they have to a one-year anniversary.
Specifically, as to the statute of limitations, that was extended to 2 years in the aftermath of Katrina Rita. We had a 1-year prescription period, and auto accidents are 1 year. Many of the claims and limitations on initiating litigation are 1 year in our state. But for homeowners and victims of hurricane events, we ordered the companies to voluntarily extend their period, the prescription period, the statute of limitations, and all of them did so. The legislature then, in session after the companies had agreed to do it, passed a law that made it the law that that our victims of a hurricane event have 2 years to file their claim, and the Supreme Court signed off on it in record time, actually, to get it accomplished, and that's the law in our state now. So they have another year and a month to initiate litigation. There can be specific provisions relative to your claim in your policy, depending on your company, that you need to be cognizant of. And in that case, the first person you go to is your agent and ask what the limitations, if any, are. They can't give legal advice unless they happen to also be a lawyer, which is very rare. But they can't do that. We can't give legal advice, but we can answer questions specific to a particular company's policies and policy forms that they use in selling their insurance. And we're happy to hear from consumers with such concerns. Our number is 800-259-5300. And our website also has some helpful tips, but also can access us at LDI, Louisiana Department of Insurance, .la.gov, LDI.la.gov, 800-259-5300.
Some really good information, Jim, and we appreciate that. And so, Commissioner, I guess the other question is there a direct route that people can have? I mean, I hear stories all the time. In fact, talked to two of our librarians, and that's where one of our FEMA agencies are located. They are doing paperwork and making copies and free Xerox copies for people. There are people that still have not gotten anything from their insurance company, and we're going on 11 months now. And so is there any place or route? Do they file a formal complaint through and with your office? Is that the starting point for them?
Absolutely. Again, through that phone number and that website I just gave, file a complaint. That on its surface seems to be an egregious violation of a company's duty to their policyholder. Frankly, I've been all around South Louisiana in the aftermath of the hurricanes. I've not heard that they have gotten nothing. Now, there may be an occasional case of litigation that
right.
they feel like it's fraudulent or that it really didn't happen the way it's being described, that the damage was caused by something else beforehand. With 800,000 claims, that is possible, but right. It's really, really very rare. And as you describe it, just should not be happening.
Right.
They're filing a claim and not getting anything in response.
And one of those things we also need to let people know is once that becomes an attorney who gets involved to represent you, that insurance company typically is going to let two attorneys handle that together and no longer address or communicate with you about that. So it's something people need to know, right?
Even to us, when we're processing a complaint. So that's why I tell folks, before you hire your lawyer, file your complaint. Because the day we get the form filled out, page and a half, about the complaint, describing the complaint with whatever attachments, pictures, copies they want to attach to it, we send it to the company electronically. They have 15 days to answer, and their answer is given to the policyholder when we get it back from the company. That can be handed off to their lawyer. It can be used in their litigation if that is necessary. But often it's a prod to the company to get them off the dime and frankly off their dollars to get rid of the complaint and the policy, the claim that they're on the hook for, and they owe, and no doubt maybe don't agree with what they're being asked to pay, but they know they owe something for the claim that's being presented to them.
Okay. And again, I want to give that information out. You gave it earlier as we kind of close this segment. 1-800-259-5300.
Okay.
Right. People can
and
call
LDI.la.gov.
Right. LDI.la.gov. And so if people have questions, if somebody's watching this and something spurs in them, some comments that the commissioner is making about what to do, he's got a team and a staff that will be able to address those issues and be able to accept the filing of a complaint. As he mentioned, it's a 1.5-page form, very simple. And then the insurance company has 15 days to address that issue, and it should come back and response to the insured. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
That's correct. Through us.
Okay, yes. It goes through you and information to them. One of the things you mentioned earlier, it's something that kind of stuck out to me. I don't know what the process is of getting these insurance companies to come in and be able to be representatives of our insured here in Louisiana. Tell us about that process and what kind of governance there is for these companies.
Sure. Companies are required to get a license to do business in our state. And we passed what I consider to be the most important piece of legislation in the successful, just concluded legislative session, in which we did a total of about a dozen bills that address the issues that we've heard about and learned from during the recent two hurricane seasons. But the one I consider most important is the one that requires new companies coming to our state to file an application for a license with demonstrated $10 million of cash and surplus available. The current law that's been on the books for years required $3 million. We had what's called desk rule that really required $5 to $6 or $7 million before we'd approve a new company coming into our market. But now any new company has to have a minimum of $10 million. Actually copied that from Florida that did it almost exactly the same way 3 or 4 years ago, going from 3 million to 15 million on their part. And we settled at 10 million. And the whole purpose of that is not to get the $10 million on the table, although that helps. It's a tiny help though. The 6 companies that failed each left $100 million of unpaid claims behind for LIGA to pay, to process and to pay on behalf of the failed company to their policyholders. But what the $10 million does do is it motivates the ownership of those companies to be more conservative when they go to the reinsurance marketplace. I mentioned earlier, these small regional companies have to reinsure themselves up to their chin in order to take on our significant coastal exposure, more coastal exposure, frankly, than any other state. And that the big boys are exiting from coastal exposure all around the Gulf and up and down the Atlantic coast, being replaced in our state more successfully than anywhere else with those 30 small companies coming to replace that capacity. And frankly, we saw the benefit of that over the past 5 years, where rates went up for homeowners insurance just 1% per year for 5 years running during the previous to this year, where rates are going up 6.7% in the aftermath of Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida. So that $10 million of their money will motivate those owners to buy more reinsurance, as the other 24 companies, small companies that did not fail from their Laura and Ida losses, and Citizens, which will not have to assess policyholders as it did after Katrina and Rita for its losses. They had enough reinsurance in place, but these other 6 failed companies, you can look upon it as they rolled the dice. They didn't have enough of their own money on the table that if they saved a couple of $1 million in their reinsurance buy, and they were lucky, then that couple $1 million flowed to their bottom line, to their profit on their book of business. Having more skin in the game, I do believe, will motivate the small companies to buy more coverage in the reinsurance marketplace, 2/3 of which is located offshore in places like London, Bermuda, Toronto, Zurich, all around the world. We need that reinsurance market to spread our significant coastal exposure around the world. There's not enough policyholders in Central and North Louisiana to really spread affordably this risk that we have below I-10, I-12. So that's how the system works. We monitor those companies on an annual basis for their financial status, their risk-based capital requirement, their compliance with that minimum capital and surplus requirement. And those things are required to be met on an annual basis. And in some cases, we monitor companies we're watching on even a monthly basis.
Okay. As we have about a minute and a half left on this particular segment, so people have options. If what I'm hearing, people do have options other than just Louisiana citizens in our coastal areas, right?
And they do, and they will have more as we go forward. In particular, if we can get the incentive program, which was authorized in the just concluded legislative session, but not funded, as Governor Blanco did after Katrina and Rita, when she made $29 million available to attract 6 companies to come write policies out of Citizens and write policies in the impacted coastal parishes of our state. Incredibly successful from the pump that led to the 30 companies coming to our market in the aftermath of those first 6 coming and doing business successfully.
And so again, it's a process, and I'm glad you let us know that they've got to have $10 million in liquid assets, right, to begin with,
Yes.
rather than just the 3 originally, which is
That's
a
correct.
tremendous 70% increase in making sure that we're guaranteeing that they can, handle these kinds of incidents. And then again, making sure that we're following through with some of the things that were put in place and some of the decisions that were just made in this legislative session.
Glad to be
Quick
with you.
question about where we're moving to and what the problems here. We've talked a lot about homeowners, and I know you mentioned it at one time, but a lot of our business owners have really suffered with regards to a lot of them having a lot of real estate. And so right now they can't really afford the premiums. And in some cases, they don't even have companies willing to write for their policy. What options do business owners have in what we can do to help them get back on their feet?
The option they have, and we doubled the capacity, the writing capacity for commercial policies written by citizens. Up until this year, the limitation was $5 million per structure, $10 million per insured on their whole need for insurance for various properties they may own. We doubled that, $10 million per structure, $20 million for their whole portfolio of coverages that they need. Now, it's not cheap. It is the market of last resort, like the homeowners market. So it has to be priced above the private sector on a parish by parish basis. And in the commercial side, unlike the homeowner side, where there's a private market with standard policies to compare prices and set the bar right above those policies, there's no standard policy on the commercial side. Each policy has a different set of coverages, a different liability coverage, because a dry cleaner is different than a shipbuilder, and their needs and their coverages are very different, so that the pricing of commercial policies is actually done on the actuarial measurement rather than on measuring it against the private sector, where there's no standard as there is on the homeowner side.
Is there any chance of that becoming standard? Is there any chance of that ever becoming more standardized?
No,
Okay.
It's unique company to company, even
Company to company.
dry
Okay.
cleaners to dry cleaners.
Right, I got you.
Is
Okay.
different. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't mean to
So-
interrupt you.
No, not at all. That's what is available. It's not inexpensive. It is the market of last resort. But as you said, in many cases, companies are refusing to renew policies and don't want the business, and are, as happens after catastrophe, are retreating from exposure to things that just cost them a huge amount of losses.
Right. Now, and so speaking of that, tell us what the future of insurance looks like in the state of Louisiana, and what we're fighting for, and what your office is fighting for with the legislature to make things better.
We're going, well, it'll take a long time to cover all of those things, but
Right.
let me say this. We're actively recruiting companies to our market. As I mentioned before, we even had companies interested up until the last minute of their reinsurance negotiation leading into the beginning of the hurricane season in the policies left behind by these failed companies. That interest and that willingness to take on those policies until they weren't able to get it situated with their reinsurance tells me there's appetite for those residential policies that are flowing to citizens today, probably ending up at the 90,000 or more policy count, up from 35,000 when Laura hit a year ago, but down from when Katrina hit 15 years ago, when Citizens was our third largest insurer with 173,000 policies. We depopulated Citizens down to where we had to slow down the depopulation in order to keep enough premium flow into that operation to keep a residual market, a structure in place for a situation like we've had in the past 2 hurricane seasons. So it will happen again. We did it successfully after Katrina and Rita. We will attract companies, some of which are already here, that will be interested in taking this business out of Citizens and writing it on their paper and at their risk, reinsured, as I said, up to their chin in the reinsurance marketplace. It will happen sooner rather than later. It would help a lot if we could get funding for this incentive program as we had under Governor Blanco 15 years ago to attract companies to write policies out of Citizens and in, even beyond Citizens, and in coastal areas where the market has become very difficult and hard to come by. That will help on the commercial side as well. We went through the exact same thing in the aftermath of Katrina and Rita, and we got through it in relatively short time. I'd say 2 years before we were fully up and running, and actually more competitive than we were when Katrina hit in 2005.
And so we got about a minute left. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share with us over these last half an hour or so with you?
Yes, sir. We did a lot of things in this legislative session, fortify homes, a 3 adjuster limitation, other legislation like beefing up the catastrophe plans that companies have to submit to us, including itemized list of the adjusters they have on contract to use in the aftermath. All of that is being focused on and addressed, was in the legislative session, is by us on an ongoing basis. We can help with questions, with complaints, and with issues relative to insurance that's not being done properly on behalf of consumers, in particular, the victims of these 2 horrific hurricane seasons. 800-259-5300, ldi.la.gov, 800-259-5300. And I thank you very much for access to your viewers here today, Keith.
We thank you for your time, as always. We appreciate it. And that will do it for us here on Bayou Time. Don't go anywhere. A lot more local programming here on HTV.